Chapter 2 of The Watsons Go to Birmingham, 1963. This chapter is Give My Regards to Clark Poindexter. Larry Dunn was the king of the kindergarten to 4th grade, where I went to school at Clark Elementary. He was king because he was a lot older than anyone else and twice as strong as the rest of us. He was stronger because he was almost full grown, and he'd flunked some grade 2 or 3 times. He was the 3rd oldest kid at Clark. The only ones older than him and stronger than him were Byron and Buphead, who were in the 6th grade and who'd also flunked some grade at least once. We weren't sure because it was something that Mama and Dad didn't talk about. Larry Dunn was king of the kindergarten to 4th grade only because Byron didn't care about them. Larry was the king of Clark, but Byron was a god. It seemed like that would make me a prince or a real strong angel or something, but it didn't work that way. I was just another 4th grade punk. I guess having the school's god as my brother did give me some kind of special rights, but not a whole bunch. It helped me with stupid stuff, like the time I found a dollar bill and got too excited and was crazy enough to show it to Larry Dunn. I knew this was a big mistake about a second before he stuck his hand out and said, "Let me see it." What could I do? "Kenny," he said, "where you find this buck?" Outside the school over by Kenilworth." Larry turned my dollar over and over, and I started getting nervous. "You know what, Kenny?" "What?" I held my breath. "This is some real strange stuff, but I lost 50 cents over on Kenilworth yesterday, and I bet my 50 cents got hooked up with someone else's 50 cents and made this here buck." Phew! I let my breath go, smiled, and nodded. We went to the store to get change, and Larry Dunn got back the 50 cents he lost, and I got to keep the other 50 that got hooked up with Larry's. I knew if it wasn't for Byron being my big brother, Larry would have said something like, "Since my 50 cents found this other 50 cents, and they hooked up to make this here buck, I'm going to keep the whole thing." You know the rules. Finders keepers, losers weepers. Having the school's god as my relative helped in some other ways too. I had 2 things wrong with me that would have gotten me beat up and teased a lot more than I did if it hadn't been for By. The first thing was because I loved to read, people thought I was real smart, teachers especially. Teachers started treating me different than other kids when I was in the 1st grade. At first, I thought it was cool for them to think I was smart, but then I found out it made me enemies with some of the older kids, other kids. Back when I was in the 2nd grade, Miss Henry used to take me to different classrooms and have me read stuff out of the Bible or the newspaper in front of other kids. This was a lot of fun until I started looking up from what I was reading and noticed that while Miss Henry and the other teachers were smiling a mile a minute, all the other kids had their faces twisted up or were looking at me like I was a 6-legged dog. 2 years ago, Miss Henry took me to Mr. Allum's 5th grade class. Mr. Allums was the toughest teacher in the school, and just being in front of him was kind of scary. He looked down at me and said, "Good morning, Mr. Watson. I hope you are in good form today." I just nodded at him because I wasn't sure what that meant. "Don't be nervous, Kenny," Miss Henry said. "Mr. Allums would like you to read a few passages from Langston Hughes." She handed me a book and said, "You wait here while we introduce you to the class." Man, some of the time I wished I was as smart as these teachers thought I was, because if I had been, I would have dropped that book and run all the way home. If I'd been smart enough to figure out what was going to happen next, I would have never gone into that room. I stood in the hall looking at the stuff they wanted me to read while Mr. Allums told his class, "All right, I have a special treat for you today. I've often told you that as Negroes, the world is many times a hostile place for us. I saw Mr. Allums walking back and forth, whacking a yardstick in his hand. I've pointed out time and time again how vital it is that one be able to read well. I've stressed on numerous occasions the importance of being familiar and comfortable with literature. Today, Miss Henry and I would like to give you a demonstration of your own possibilities in this regard. I want you to carefully note how advanced this second grade student is, and I particularly want you to be aware of the effect his skills have upon you. I want you to be aware that some of our kids read at miraculous levels. I saw Mr. Allums point the yardstick at someone somewhere in the class and say, "Perhaps you'd like to finish the instruction. I think you know our introduction. I think you know our guests quite well." Whoever he pointed at said, "What? I didn't do nothing." Miss Henry waved for me to come in and stand in front of the class. I guess I was too nervous about Mr. Allums to have recognized the voice before, but as soon as I walked into the room, I froze. There, in the 2 seats closest to the teacher's table in the very first row, sat Buckhead and Byron. The Langston Hughes book jumped from my hand and the whole class laughed. Everyone but Byron. His eyes locked on mine, and I felt things start melting inside of me. Mr. Allums slammed the yardstick on his desk, and the class got real quiet. Let's see if you find this so humorous after you've heard how well this young man reads. And Byron Watson, if you are incapable of taking some of that fire out of your eyes, I assure you I will find a way to assist you. If instead of trying to intimidate your young brother, you would emulate him and use that mind of yours, perhaps you'd find things much easier. Perhaps you wouldn't be making another appearance in the 5th grade next year. Now would you, Byron got one more dirty look in at me, then looked down at his desk. Mr. Allums might as well have tied me up to a pole and said, "Ready, aim, fire." I read through the Langston Hughes stuff real quick, but that was a mistake. Miss Henry said, "Slow down some, Kenneth." And then she took the book from me and handed it back upside down. She had a great big smile when she told Mr. Allums, "When he goes too fast, this slows him down a bit." I read some more with the book upside down and got some real strange looks from the 5th graders. Finally, they let me quit. Mr. Allums stood up and clapped his hands, and a couple of the old kids did too. Byron never looked at me the whole time, but Buckhead was giving me enough dirty looks for the both of them. "Bravo! Outstanding, Mr. Watson. Your future is unlimited. Bravo!" All I could do was try to figure out how to get home alive. I didn't even get out of the schoolyard before Byron and Buckhead caught up to me. A little crowd bunched up around us, and everyone was real excited because they knew I was about to get jacked up. Buckhead said, "Here that little egghead punk is." "Leave the little clown alone," Byron said. "It's a crying shame taking him around like a circus freak." He punched me kind of soft in the arm and said, "At least you ought to make 'em pay for you doing that mess. If it was me, they'd be coming out they pockets with some folding money every time they took me around." I couldn't believe it. I think Byron was proud of me. When everybody saw Byron wasn't going to do anything to me for being smart, they all decided that they better not do anything either. I still got called Egghead or Poindexter or Professor some of the time, but that wasn't bad compared to what could have happened.